Hi, I'm Barb Agolia, and this is Barb's Fresh Eyes.
Camaraderie is the pathway to go from stuck to unstuck and then really achieve your purpose at work, maybe, and in your life. Welcome to Barb's Fresh Eyes. I'm so excited. I didn't even introduce myself because today we are so lucky to have Rajiv Mehta here with us. And he has graciously offered to give us a sneak peek to his upcoming book and his thought leadership about camaraderie. The book is called Rethinking the Foundations of Joyful, High Performance Teams and Culture. Who doesn't want to be part of that? So Raj, so welcome. Thank you so much for joining us today.
I'm so pleased to be here. We had such a great sort of pre-chat that I'm looking forward to this.
The first thing I want to ask is, in the context of business, how do you define camaraderie? Like, what does it actually mean?
Yeah, I mean, it's a good question because it's a word we sort of know. It's like, but we've never really thought about it. And so the best place I find to start is to identify these four words that we kind of muddle together. There's community, there's connection, there's belonging, and there's camaraderie. And so let me just put all four together. So community is kind of like a container. You know, you're a New Yorker, or you're a Georgia Tech alumnus, or you work for Motorola. All of these, you kind of know what it is. You're part of this community. Belonging is sort of deeply emotional. It's this sense that you belong as part of this group, but you also know that everyone else in the group also believes that you belong in the group, so that you can be different from everyone else, but you're still welcome. You can be yourself. You don't have to put on a mask. And belonging also has kind of the flip side of it, which is the sense that the community belongs to you. And so you have this sense that I need to take care of this. This is mine. But also this sense of agency, the sense of authority that what I do matters for the group. So belonging is very complex. People have written whole books on belonging, but I'll summarize it at that. Connection is kind of the most intimate. It's between two people. It's the sense that there are some characteristics of the other person that you honestly, genuinely like. And then that really provides the anchor for the relationship. And it could be multiple things, but it's like you don't have to agree on everything in the world, but there's these few things that you connect on. And so that's connection.
Yeah, I'm going to tell my husband that we don't have to agree on everything.
Right. It doesn't work that way.
Exactly.
We don't want clones. And so camaraderie kind of combines these terms and adds a sense of purpose, a really clear sense of purpose. So it's usually used with a small group of people. They all know each other. They all have this deep sense of belonging in that group. They connect with each other. They recognize things about each person that they have some connection with. Again, not that they're clones. But then finally, it's a group with a purpose. There is something that the group is driving towards, and you're going to get there together. You're going to take full advantage of each other's skills and personalities to get there together. It's a group commitment. And essentially, you working away know that everybody else in the group is committed to that cause as well.
So when we think about this, and you talk about this in the book a little bit, the idea, like there's some obvious examples that when you say them to people, they're like, yep, I get it, like the military and working as a group. And I would love to talk about NASA and being part of groups like that, because you have some really interesting personal experience. You're a former NASA guy, now talking about joy in the world. And we seem to be able to accept the notion of camaraderie in that space, and a little bit less when we start moving to business and work. So why are we able to accept it in that space? And what have you also learned? Like, what are the foundations that you've kind of learned? Like, your work is research, but it's also your experience.
Yeah. And so let me tell you how my eyes were sort of open to this.
Yeah.
As opposed to kind of a normal appreciation. Isn't that nice when you have it? And I was talking to some very senior sort of military leaders, people, with 20, 30 years in their career, very high-ranking folks. And one of them said to me, Raj, we take this seriously in the sense that the military for thousands of years takes it seriously, that in the trenches, soldiers are fighting for each other. and so that you need to have that strong sense of camaraderie. But he also said something important. He said they, at that senior level, have this deep belief that if you don't know yourself, you don't know your team, you're almost guaranteed to lose the battle. It's like, this is fundamental. This is so, so, so important that you will not succeed in a sustained way unless you have that deep sense of camaraderie where the team is working as one.
And if you don't, I think you said something very big there. Because when we talk about stuck, a lot of it starts with, do you actually know yourself to the point where you can identify when you're not in necessarily such a great place?
Right. No, exactly. Having a deep sense of appreciation kind of at a day-to-day level, at a work level, what kinds of situations sort of stress you out that, what are your hot buttons, and like recognizing that. And like when I was younger, like working at, Apple and Adobe and so forth 30 years ago, people knew they could set me off because if there was some point of, market facts or whatever that I knew I was right on, people know they could just get me riled up by being devil's advocate and pretending now, a few decades later, I'm smarter about that. I can recognize that. So it's just, okay, they're picking on me and so forth. But so appreciating each other's skills, but also appreciating each other's shortcomings. If you want your group to succeed, you've got to acknowledge these are human beings. They have their shortcomings. Don't exacerbate them. Play with that. Just, you need to treat Joe differently than you treat Anne. That's okay. They're a part of your team. Do the best you can. But I was going to say, to your point, when I worked at NASA, lots of brilliant people. There was my first event where we were sort of reviewing somebody's presentation, and people were just throwing barbs and tearing this man's slides apart. I was like, oh my God, I can't deal with this. It's like, if I was up at the front of the room. But of course, very soon, as I came to be accustomed to the milieu, I came to appreciate, no, my gosh, they all already know they have deep respect for each other. They all know everybody's brilliant, everyone's working hard. It's more like we together are going to make this presentation, this code, as brilliant as it could be. And so that comfort that everyone has, that sense of camaraderie, actually allows the conversation to be really fierce without anyone really getting bent out of shape. I mean, your ego can take a little bit, but they're good.
That is so funny, because when I read that, and you have that story in the book, and when I read it, I thought about my first day at American Express, which is a brand and company that I love. But it was one of my first couple of days, and it was my first presentation, and it's a very deck-heavy culture. And I walked in and I did this presentation, and I didn't really stick to the script because that's, as you can see, not quite my style. And at the end, no one said a word, like zero. And I left the meeting and I asked my boss, like, what the hell was that? No one said anything. And she said, oh no, we don't give feedback in person. And then she said, and you didn't pre-align for the meeting to make sure that you knew what they were going to say when they said it.
Wow.
And it was crazy. It was like craziness. And it was foundationally a lack of this feeling, I think, of camaraderie.
Right.
It just wasn't there. Like, they weren't comfortable with themselves and with me and what they would say.
Yeah. And, I had the opposite experience when I was at Apple in the early 90s where, it was sort of like, we were working on making our products great. Not that we always succeeded, but that was the spirit. And so, but there was also this spirit of deep respect for each other. So you would have these fierce conversations, but in that spirit of, we are going to work together to make this as great as possible. And in a sense, not allowing the elephants in the room to be unacknowledged.
I love that. And it feels so much more comfortable to me. Like, it was so odd that nobody said anything. I'm like, what the hell?
Yeah. And, kind of like in the moment, you might feel uncomfortable. Your ego gets a little bruised as people are picking on things that you thought were good. But, once you get accustomed to that, then it's like, no, they're just pointing it out because it needs to be better. Let's deal with it.
So there's this sort of life or death element to NASA,
Sure.
right? We just saw Artemis 2, and it's very exciting. And you can actually feel the camaraderie of the crew, and importantly, the guys on the ground, like mission control.
Yeah.
But this life or death element, how much does that drive camaraderie? Because that's a hard thing to replicate, I think.
Right, absolutely. I mean, in a sense, there's these sectors of society where it's taken totally seriously because it is life or death. If we're talking about military, you talk about exploration, going to the moon or to Mount Everest, whatever. There is that life or death. But at the same time, we do it in sports. Sports teams, the ones that are thriving, almost always have deep camaraderie. Whereas you can have a team that's individually brilliant, but they don't play as a team and it doesn't work so well. But in the business environment, I should say there are two reasons to want camaraderie. One is actually the most fundamental one. It's like we as human beings, we thrive when we have that. It's joyful. We like it. There actually doesn't need to be any other reason for us to be great together. Just it is a purpose in itself. But from a business perspective, we think about the fact that if you want sustained high performance, you have to have a sense of camaraderie. You need the team to be able to go through good times and bad as well as possible, which means together. And
so when I was kind of reflecting on this, and I'm telling you was so triggering for me in a positive way, that reading the book, because I'm like, oh yeah, I remember that experience. I worked in a credit industry dynamics in 2008, 2009, 2010, and it was not a fun, happy place to be. Right. And yet I think about the camaraderie that we had because there was we are going to fix this together.
Right.
And it really, we got through it together. And those people that I worked with at that time are, many, many years later, almost 20 years later, are still people that I feel very close and connected.
Right. It's funny, in whether it's in business or any place else, there are times when the environment just makes it really hard. And by the environment, it could be, it's your little group within this larger company that's very chaotic and so forth. Or it could be that, the economy is tumbling or, current state of society. But that is especially when it's so important that you have a strong sense of camaraderie, because you still need to get the stuff done. And having this sense that we are doing it together makes a world of difference.
How do you know when there's a lack of camaraderie? You definitely kind of talk a little bit about this. What are the signals as a leader? And this is really for team leaders. I think they have to own this. Would you agree with that?
Yeah.
Should they be looking for to say there's some bells going off here?
Well, I mean, it's funny, at the most fundamental level, we are such social creatures that you kind of know it. Is there deep level of trust in the organization? Are people going to get really freaked out if we start pointing out things that need to be better or not? Are we working on this together or not? This as well, at least most of us have a good sense of that. But if you want to get, slightly more detailed about it, it's when you start seeing that people you've sort of lost the joy in the room, you've lost sort of the engagement. So people might still be doing their jobs, but they're not stepping out and helping others or even speaking up about, we could do this better. They're not helping each other out. They're just not engaging as richly as you would like, especially initially. But as things get worse and worse, because people only put up with that for so long, there starts to be more finger pointing and blaming, where you're actively not contributing, it leads to quiet quitting or just people feeling a sense of burnout and depression and so forth. So then it kind of becomes really obvious that you have this very dysfunctional organization. But the initial part is kind of just slow lack of engagement. You can also see it kind of at a personal level if you're leading a team. I mean, I've been there, when you're trying to lead a team that doesn't have camaraderie. And I remember a friend of mine, a psychologist who works with, coaching executives and so forth. And the way she described it is that people come home defended, that they still have their armor on. They're ready to, if they can run and hide, that would be great. They're ready to fight if necessary. And they simply can't open up and connect with their spouses, with their children, with their friends. And that leads them to feel so lonely, because they can't turn off that posture of I'm going to be attacked. And, it's just personally miserable. So
I read that in the book. It's in there. And I remembered when, as a mom of young children, I remember once coming home and having, it wasn't just that it was a bad day, it was one of those days. I felt like people were blaming me where things weren't happening. I was questioning my expertise and competency. And I sat on the couch in a different room and I started playing like a video game or something. And I did it for I thought it was 10 minutes. My husband came in and said, "You've been sitting here for an hour. Do you realize that? Like your kids are waiting for you to come in and say, 'Hi, Mom.'" And I think that's what it was. Like in retrospect, I think that was, I couldn't turn that.
Yeah.
And it was such high anxiety. Like it was misery. Like your point about it being miserable is really true. There was another piece of this in the book that really struck me too in today's world, where if you don't have camaraderie, things like adaptation get very hard. And when we're all trying to get people to adapt AI in a reasonable and a responsible way, like that also really struck me.
It really does. The one place, I saw it kind of similar to that just came to my mind was, as we were into year 1, year 2, et cetera, of the pandemic, and I was asking some of my friends who were, executives in large companies, which, for myself, it was more than 20 years ago because I kind of switched career paths. But, lots of friends are still executives in big companies. And I was asking them what kind of things they had seen. And for the companies that had been working really well and they're working on international teams anyway, even when they're in the office, they're on Zoom kind of thing. Initially, they were saying, well, it's not very different. We've become more efficient and so forth. But as the talk continued, we recognized that, in fact, decision-making had slowed down. That small decisions, they just happened as they always had. But anytime things were complicated, big decisions, he was recognizing that things were just taking forever. Because they didn't have all those teeny little hallway conversations and all the, beers after work and so forth, they had kind of lost this camaraderie that they had built up because they weren't actively nurturing it. And that was leading to this kind of nobody wants to, be out front on some major decision because what's everybody else going to say? And so people were telling me how the big decisions were becoming so much harder, this kind of general lack of efficiency. So, you see these things and you kind of reflect. It's, normal language. Before I started using the word camaraderie for so much of this, it's just the team doesn't feel like a team anymore.
And does it start with a leader we started this conversation, but you really have to know yourself. Another guest I had on, Andrea Zareski, was talking about if she got up and she was like, I don't really feel like going to work today. And it happened more than once. She's like, oh, I know I'm stuck. Something's not right here.
Right.
So it does, for leaders who are listening, it does really start with us understanding our own triggers, as you were talking about earlier. Because if it's happening to us, is it likely happening to others
as well? Yeah, the way I kind of describe it from, being logical sense is that camaraderie requires the team, to know each other, right? And it's you can't be accommodating or taking advantage of people's skills or people's deficiencies if you're unaware of them, or, what sets them off and so forth. If you don't know the others, you can't work with them as well as possible. Well, if you don't know yourself, it's hardly likely that anybody else is going to know you. And so the starting point for people really knowing each other well is for the individuals to know themselves, to be able to explain their thinking or their shortcomings or what turns them on, what turns them off, and so forth. So it turns out that self-knowledge is really core, because the other stuff can't happen if you don't have deep self-knowledge. And I have found through my own sort of research over the last 20 years that most of us don't know our day-to-day lives as well as we think. You would think we're living with ourselves all the time. How hard can this be? But I found in all sorts of ways, big and small, that we don't. And this is not a criticism. It's more like we're just not all that good at observing day-to-day life. We've never paid a lot of attention to it. We've even been told not to. And so this is a thing that we have to start off with. But in a sense, the 3 key components I think of is that you have to know each other. So there has to be this mutual knowing, that because of that, you really have to be good at knowing yourself and sort of have the skills of observation. And thirdly, and this is really important, is that you as a group have kind of what I think of as a shared story. in that you have known each other long enough that you're able to kind of recognize that you have known each other for a while. You can recognize how you have individually changed over time. You can recognize how you as a group have changed over time. And that takes time. So camaraderie builds up over a long period of time.
So that is interesting because we are definitely living in the world where people don't stick around in jobs or teams as long as possible. So when I was thinking about this story idea, it made me feel like that could be a really interesting tool. If you have a clear shared story and you have new entrants and people who are exiting, getting them grounded on the story is a really great way to kind of bring them into the group as you're sort of nurturing. Because groups at work are never static. People are always kind of coming in and coming out.
Right. No, of course.
And any other thoughts on, like, for leaders, again, so know yourself feels really important. Know your team and the people around you. And I would say especially your leaders team, like your and that's interesting too, because in the book, you're like, oh, people do offsites and have fun days and stuff. And that's not enough. Like, that is not really deeply knowing people.
Right.
So what are your thoughts about getting to know people more deeply?
So I wanted to sort of two parts to what you were just saying. One is, so camaraderie effectively applies kind of at a small team. It's like you have a do together. But of course, many leaders run large divisions, companies, and so forth. And so that's kind of at the higher level of what is your culture? Does your culture include these ideas of camaraderie or not? Because, if you're the CEO of even a 500-person company, you don't know everyone. And, never mind if you're the CEO of a 100,000 people organization or something like that. And the example in the book I talk about is HP. Back when I was a summer intern at HP, way back, in 1988, at the time, being an employee of HP was something that most people at HP had deep pride in. And it had a very, very clear culture, the HP way, which was codified into a book by Messrs. Hewlett and Packard. And they took this seriously. It wasn't just a poster on the wall. It was the essence of the company. And so me as an intern joining for the summer, this was drilled into it on day one. And you very quickly saw it wasn't just a poster on the wall, that is how the company operated. And so for leaders, again, you could be a very senior leader. You do have a small team. It's called your executive team. Make sure you guys have a strong sense of camaraderie. But then if you're responsible for a much larger organization, bring that into the culture. But to your other point about all these things that we do, like offsites and coaching and so forth, I think of them as, generally really good ideas. They make sense. We clearly, most of the time, enjoy these things. But the metaphor I used in the book is like it's as if you're planting great seeds in unhealthy soil and expecting them to thrive. It doesn't work that way. You have to create the environment, the culture for these things to thrive. So if you already have a good, strong sense of camaraderie because of actively working at it, then you can sort of deepen that and bring the joy up to the surface by doing things like great offsites and webinars and so forth.
And you do need to nurture it, right? Like, it's not a static
You do need
thing.
to nurture it. Yeah. These are relationships,
Right.
And they need to be nurtured. If I may, because this came up in my mind as we were thinking. So there's this, many of us who are senior executives went to business school and all the rest of it. And it's really ironic that even though we know how important camaraderie is, how important the mood of your team is, how a sense of team, a sense of we is so critical to actual success, that is not where we spend our time. So like 95% of business school, at least when I went there, was all about everything else, customers, operations, finance, accounting, all this tactical stuff, and like barely any mention of how do you build a team? How do you nurture that sense of camaraderie? And it's really ironic because I went to Columbia Business School, and the head of management department at Columbia Business School has written an amazing book called The Employee Advantage, in which he stresses to executives that you need to pay even more attention to your employees than you do to your customers. Otherwise, none of the none of this stuff is going to work. And yet in the book, he acknowledges that he himself is guilty of spending 95% of his time teaching students other stuff, and that he himself and this institution that he loves don't pay attention to their employees the way that he encourages people to do. So this is kind of the business world that all of us have sort of grown up in. And so we really have to wake up to this because we have just, that's not been our way of working.
So is that what it is? It's just not our way of working? Because at some point, like when you talk about how like this joyful but high performing teams and cultures, like that's the name of the book, everybody wants that. Like who doesn't want that?
Right.
So why is there so much resistance? Like to me, I talk about this a lot with my clients. Urgent blocks out important. Is that what's happening here? Like, and we're set in our ways. Like, is it a combination of those things, or is there something else you think going on?
I think, there's a lot of systemic challenges on that, because we have, for example, we have come to prioritize results over relationships, and I'll pick on some like community organizations in this sense, like here's this local nonprofit that's about planting trees, or here's this nonprofit that's doing this. And we get together and it's like, that's our goal. We need to plant trees. You're not here for chit chat. And it's like, God, no. It's like if people aren't, especially for volunteers, if they're not enjoying it, they're not coming back. And so we have grown up in that culture. We've also grown up in a culture with this sort of absurd focus on measurement. And me as a scientist, like, okay, I get measurement is really, really, really important. If you measure the wrong things, it kind of is a waste of time.
Right.
And so it's really hard to put simple numbers on joy, on feeling a sense of team,
right,
on knowing that you are working on camaraderie. So that's part of the problem, is that we don't see that. And we have come to a sort of almost like actively deprioritize things that we can see subjectively. It's like we can't measure with a number. It's like we can't do statistics on it. And I find this absurd. As a scientist, like evidence is important. What does evident mean? It means it's obvious.
Yeah.
And so if something is really obvious, you don't need a statistical microscope to go look for it.
Right,
but we've
right.
been trained, like unless it comes out of some incredible Excel spreadsheet, it's not meaningful. And it's like, we don't need to do, ABC studies on whether you should jump out of a plane with or without a parachute. It's kind of blatantly obvious. And so we have lost our ability to trust our judgment on things.
Yeah, that is really interesting. This is like an out of left field story, but I'm going to share it. I support and have for many, many years working moms, and I encourage them to breastfeed. And one of the things I always hear is, well, I don't know how much milk they're getting. And I think, well, yes, you do. If they're doing their little poopy pee-pee diapers, you're getting milk. If they're gaining weight, they're getting milk. And I keep thinking like we're looking in the wrong places.
We're looking in the wrong place. Yeah.
And this is foundational to my platform of Purpose OS. Like you want to do this thing, but you're behaving this way, and it's absolutely in contradiction to achieving this thing.
Right.
We're
right.
definitely looking in some of the wrong places, and it's really been built up, I think, in corporate America. Like I'm in marketing. You talk about up funnel. Everyone's like, deprioritize it because we can't measure it. I'm like, but it matters.
Right. We have to, and which is not to say to dismiss those things. It's like we have to learn how to measure, or in a sense of how to value. And even if it's at the level of it's good, it's okay, it's bad, it's poor, your judgment is worth something. Pay attention to that.
Right. I think that's some of the fun really of working in a startup. Like they don't have the measurement or the capacity for measurement. So they have to trust judgment much more
right.
than maybe like the bigger you get, the harder it is to really trust judgment.
Right. And in fact, much of the sort of the bulk of the book is showing people that you can become incredibly skilled at paying attention to these sorts of things in a scientific disciplined way.
So let's talk about that a little bit, this personal science.
Yeah, so personal science is simply this idea of paying attention to and exploring anything in your personal life that you're interested in a disciplined way. If you think of big science as people with fancy credentials studying big issues in the world in a disciplined way of science, personal science is the same thing, just you doing it for yourself. And I know that in a modern world, it's a scary word. It's like, oh, I don't know science. But it's like, I have found this to be nonsensical in that if you have a hobby of any sort, and in the book I write, if you're good at cooking or gardening or fly fishing, something that you honestly could talk about for hours in minutia, it's like you already have the skills of science to observe, to hypothesize, to experiment, to see what changes in a disciplined way, and just apply those skills to yourself. So that's one thing. It's like you already know how to do this. You've just never sort of learned to do it in your own way. Secondly, as in anything, having good tools makes a difference. And I point out, it's from a business environment, we think of accounting. It's like, we have been doing accounting a long time. Like some of those ancient Sumerian clay tablets literally are business accounting. And so we've been at this a long time. And yet about 500 years ago, when someone invented double entry bookkeeping, that tool, that method was a huge advance in the field of accounting, as was, 50 years ago, the invention of spreadsheets. It's a huge advance in what we do. So tools make a difference. And same thing for all of these sorts of observation things that I'm talking about, learning to do that well, tapping into existing tools to do that well, kind of learning ideas for how do you pose questions, how do you gather data, how do you visualize all kinds of data and so forth, is a skill to be learned.
So I actually think in this modern world, I work with a lot of new entrants into the market, the work world. Understanding how to think about these things is now the brain trust that we need to create. Right. AI will be much more task oriented. You may not need, they can execute the spreadsheet, but you need to tell them how to think about this. So the more we can understand that and value it. So I want to go back to this notion of valuing it in a corporate world. So I grew up in a couple of different corporates, and we had this, notion of the individual contribution was like held all primacy. It was more important. We didn't even have great ways to measure a team contribution. We had stack rank and other things like that. We're actually anti-collaboration, in my opinion. So any thoughts on that and advice that you would offer to teams on how they can really present what they've accomplished in a more meaningful way so that the organization can focus on the team, not the individuals?
Yeah, so a couple of thoughts. Let's start at the micro and then I'll pull back up to the macro. So at the micro level, one of the tools, methods that I call social networks. I've developed a set of a half a dozen tools, and that I think of as a mapping ourselves starter kit. And this is, freely downloadable on my website and so forth. One of the tools called a social network, for lack of a better name, you use to explore the people that you work with. And so using this tool, you pay attention. Who are the people that I work with sort of day in, day out, or just whoever comes top of mind is where you start. And then you pay attention to each of these relationships in the sense of, how close are you? How frequently do you work together? How much do you help that person? How often do they help you? But also pay attention to the smaller things like you were touching on. It's like, what does Joe uniquely add that I value in our relationship, but also turn it around? It's like, what does Joe think you're adding to the value? So what are your perceptions about this? And when you go through this exercise, it turns out to be, kind of an emotional burden because we're unused to thinking about this, but it's worthwhile. You might sometimes discover that, I'm picking on Joe here, but that this person, Joe, is on the whole kind of incompetent at everything. But why do you have him there? Because somehow when he is there, the spirit of the group is so much better. Somehow he is the glue that makes you all sing, in which case now you come to appreciate what is he adding to your team. And it's very much a team edition, right? Because he's not, on those metrics not doing so well. And there, you could have another person, Anne over here, who his personality isn't the warmest, fuzziest, but who apparently is like ready and willing to always help people with what they need in a way that's always helpful. She's not condescending. She just comes in, she does the thing that you need and gets on with it. And you come to recognize that, okay, you don't want to be spending, your weekends hanging out with her, but for your team. So helping to recognize kind of at this micro level, how is each person contributing to the team? Because you need to take the time to think about that to be able to appreciate it. At the very macro level, there are plenty of business leaders who sort of innately believe that having a strong sense of camaraderie is fundamental to their performance success. And those are the people that I'm trying to speak to. If someone doesn't believe it, I'm not going to try and convince them otherwise. It's like just.
But I would say I would think about it not just in terms of belief or not belief. For me, I was reading this book, and it was this sense of realization. Before I spoke to you, Raj, I don't think this idea, I never would have put it in the context of camaraderie.
Right. Absolutely.
So what you're doing is actually just sort of driving some awareness to this as a concept. And I want to ask you this and really challenge you a little bit to say, because when I read the book and when I thought about it, like in the beginning of this call, you talked about the 4 areas: belonging, connection, community, but I don't know that they're all equal. My sense is if you don't have camaraderie, those other 3 things get harder to do.
Yes. Yeah, you're absolutely right. I mean, that's why the first third of the book is about this, so that we, in a sense, the readers, recognize this in themselves. That they recognize themselves in what I'm writing. And I find, that many people like you, I mean, there's only a few people that have read the preliminary book, but never mind, I've been speaking about this for a long time, that people recognize themselves when I describe these things. They didn't have the language for it before. They never thought about this before, but it resonates because that is how they were already trying to do things. There are people, I mean, the world is full of all sorts, who sincerely seem to believe that human resources are just cogs in the wheel. I'm going to get the most out of this person I can in the 6 months before they quit. I'm not convincing them otherwise. I'm not even trying.
No. But I would say for me, the aha moment came when I read this thing about that you wrote in the book. When camaraderie is missing, everything else requires more effort.
Right.
That is what stuckness is. It's harder. It's draining versus energy versus energizing. It feels like delays versus momentum. It's what you said earlier. It's like quiet quitting versus I'm excited to go to work on Monday morning.
Right.
So I think that for me really tied this kind of together. Again, who doesn't want that?
Who doesn't want that? Well, it's interesting. So one of those very senior military leaders, I talked to him after he had transitioned out of the military into the corporate world, and I was asking him, what is he seeing different? And he said that the one thing especially stood out for him was, he said, all the elephants in the room. And I'm like, what are you talking about? And he was saying that, when he was a captain in the SEALs, that when in SEAL teams, I mean, they do hard stuff. And when they come back, they talk about what went wrong. And they're really frank about it. It's like, this didn't happen the way you did, and so forth. And they talk about it. They all get it out. They solve it in the sense of this is how it should have been. And then they get on with it. He says, it's a big deal, but it's not a big deal. You just do it. He says now that he's in this corporate environment, he's shocked how many elephants are in the room that are just actively ignored. And so it worries him that it's getting in the way of things being done well, of having the great sense of team. He says it's also worrying in the sense of like, is he contributing some elephants that nobody else is speaking up about? So he's having the self-doubt because no one's speaking up.
And I would even say, I love that particular idiom, elephants in the room, because they are big, giant elephant and they're barriers. Like they take everything in the room up and stop progress. They really can stop progress at work. Another one of my guests, Nicole Trayman, was saying, say the thing. Like that's her start today activity. Say the thing. Because if you're thinking it, I guarantee you somebody else is thinking it. And I would say, if I could say this, patting myself a little bit on the back, I feel like in my contribution to American Express was I was always willing to say the thing in a very not say the thing culture. So I'm a great believer in this. I think it's really, really powerful. And when you say it, you have to say it without judgment. You have to be curious versus critical.
Yes.
But I think there's big power. So I would love to transition a little bit to this notion of I am at the edge of my seat. I want to embrace this. What is the start today activity that I can do to start myself on this pathway of really embracing camaraderie and building it?
Sure. So in the book, I describe it as like I spend a lot of time on self-knowing, on knowing yourself, because unless you have that skill, it's hard to know others and it's hard for others to know you. It's also, if you're going to build up your skills of observation, of seeing how Joe and Ann and Tom and the rest of your teammates are doing, your skills at observation are important. Well, you hone your skills by the person that you're closest to, which is you, because it seems like a good place to start. So a lot of the book is spent on that. And I can give you some examples of where people can start on that. But the second part, which is coming back to camaraderie, is having appreciated that, how do you do it together? And so if I may, let's talk about that first.
Yeah.
So I call it this experience of collective self-reflection. And so you as a small...
Wait, let's say that again. Experience of collective self-reflection. Okay, I'm curious.
And so that means each of you, you're 5 people, you're 12 people, whatever, you're doing something together. You've each chosen to pay attention to some aspect of your life, maybe how you spend your time or your close relationships or the experiences of different spaces that you have to work in. But each of you is paying attention to yourself in terms of that topic. But then you come together regularly to share your observations, your ahas, and discover how you have different perceptions, different needs, different thoughts. And it's the process of getting to know yourself and each other, which of course then leads to ideas from what you might do differently, but it's...
I would love to get leaders to think about this. I think this would be, like every leader has a leadership team meeting, right? If they could cordon off 15 minutes a week, because that's the pushback you're going to get. Oh my God, another meeting on my calendar. But if you could cordon off 15 minutes of your weekly leadership meeting to say self-reflection together and encourage people to share what they're finding out about themselves, right? Like how important is that? I think that would be an amazing way to get this camaraderie party started.
Yeah. And I would gently push back on the 15-minute idea in the sense like, well, is this important? If it's not, like, when people got into design thinking or all of these other things, it's not like they woke up and say, oh, design thinking. Okay, we'll have someone from, this design firm come in and give us a 15-minute talk on design. No, it's not how it works. If you're going to do this seriously, get serious from the beginning. But start with a small group of people. You're not committing the 50,000 people in your employees. You're committing the 6 of you. Is this important? But, it's like the cheap way to get started, which is not, I don't mean it in a derogatory sense, but is the book. The reason I wrote the book is that people can read 15 minutes here or there and so forth and decide for themselves, is this something I want to put my time and energy into?
Oh, there's no way you can do it for 15 minutes because you're not going to want to put it down.
No, but you can do it in chunks,
I know
right?
what you mean, but it's like, it is.
It's like before you commit to this whole thing, you can read the book and decide whether it's something you're interested in or not. But so it's very important to keep in mind that you're going to do this as a group. As I point out, this is like such one of those things to point out that's like, duh, but it's like camaraderie is not a solo activity. Relationships are also not something that happen like that. And so both of these things, it's like camaraderie is something you are going to do as a team, and it's going to take time. But just back to the sort of self-knowing part, there's this workbook that anybody can get access to called the Mapping Ourselves Workbook, which has a dozen of these tools for self-reflection. And the one I encourage everyone to start with is one called an Atlas Care Map, which is really paying attention to your own ecosystem of care. So basically close family and friends and how you're caring for each other. I've encouraged this because it requires no data gathering. It's just what's in your head. And because this is proven powerful, like across the board humans. I've done it with SEALs and Green Berets. I've done it with corporate execs and doctors and nurses. I've done it with house cleaners and waiters and even 8-year-olds. This is just human. And so it's a good place to start. But all of these tools require a little bit of learning and doing. And, we talked about this earlier, if I may, that, kind of a very trivial, seemingly trivial activity that people can do to become aware of this is I think of it as, what does care mean to you? What are your experiences of care? And the exercise, very easy to describe, is basically sit down with a little piece of paper and think of the last 2 to 3 days and just jot down all of the tiny little moments of care you have given or received. And not just care in the sense that you helped out your uncle who has Parkinson's. It doesn't have to be so serious. It could be that the barista remembered you from yesterday, smiled, and kind of knew what order you wanted. It could be that Joe brought in donuts to work, even though you don't like donuts. It was a nice gesture, and so forth. Somebody on the street, some vagrant asked you for directions to something, and you took the moment to stop and point out where he, how he could get wherever he's going and so forth. These little moments of care, or, you were busy at home doing your work because that's the reality of life these days. And your child comes up and needs some help with his homework, and you take a moment to help him with the homework. So just these tiny little moments of care and just jot them down. It helps you see that we are immersed in a sea of activities of care that we tend to pay no attention to. And it's really quite powerful.
I love that. I think that's an amazing place to start for each of us. And for me to end the podcast and say, thank you so much. This was such a fantastic conversation. And I would really encourage people to take a look at this book when it comes out. It's called Comaraderie, Rethinking the Foundations of Joyful, High-Performing Teams and Cultures. So Raj, thank you again. It was fantastic to have you. This is Barb's Fresh Eyes. Keep on listening.
Thanks, Barb.
My head is exploding with energy and excitement after this conversation with Raj, who was so generous in his time and energy and sharing what was happening with his book about camaraderie. And here is the great reveal. Camaraderie is not a pathway to success and getting unstuck. It's the pathway when you're talking about a team. And the thing that stuck with me so hard was this idea that everything requires more effort when you lack camaraderie. Everything requires more effort when you lack camaraderie. We always think of it as a nice to have in the world of business, even though when you bring up these examples of the Army or NASA, it's a must have. And I would love for you to think about bringing that kind of mentality to your culture, to your teams, and to your organization, because that's where it's needed. Up until now in our podcast, we've talked about getting unstuck about us as individuals. This is a pathway for a team and an organization to get unstuck. So Raj's start today had a lot of tips and interesting ways to kind of think about this. But there's one that really stands out for me over and over again when I speak with him. And that's this idea of observing, building your skills of observation, and thinking about it in terms of caring, tiny caring moments. Moments that you give to others and moments that people give care to you. I came home the other day and my husband had filled the tank of gas for my car. And it was just this tiny little moment of caring that made my life easier, better, and it made me feel more connected to him. So just start observing them, have a consciousness to them, because what you will likely find is that there's a lot more people around you caring about you and for you than you realize. And that is like a beautiful gift in the world, and it's the basis for camaraderie. It's the starting point to get going. Thank you so much for listening, and I hope you got meaning out of this. And if you did, feel free to share it with others that might benefit from it as well. It is available wherever you find a podcast. And keep leading with fresh eyes.